The strangest betrayals rarely begin with a confession. Sometimes they begin with a door that was supposed to be locked. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon, the kind of afternoon when the whole house seemed to exhale. My husband, Robert, had gone out to play golf, and I believed his son Liam was visiting a friend. For once, I had the house to myself. I made some coffee, curled up on the sofa with a book, and tried to enjoy the silence. But then I heard something upstairs. At first, I ignored it. A dull thump. Then another. There was a faint movement above me, followed by the sound of something being dragged across the floor. I assumed Liam had come home without telling me. That irritated me more than it should have, because privacy was something I desperately needed that day. Still, something about the noise felt wrong. I put my book down and slowly climbed the stairs. The hallway was empty, but Liam's bedroom door was slightly open. That immediately caught my attention. Liam was private. He normally kept his door closed, especially when he was expecting company. I stopped a few steps away. Then I heard voices. One was Liam's. The other was a woman's. My stomach tightened. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably secretive. I stood there wondering whether I should turn around and pretend I had heard nothing. After all, Liam was an adult. Whatever was happening inside his room was his business. But then I heard my name. I froze. For several seconds, I couldn't move. Why would someone inside Liam's room be talking about me? I walked closer, telling myself there had to be an innocent explanation. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe the woman was a friend. Maybe they were discussing something completely unrelated. But curiosity won. I reached the doorway and looked through the narrow opening. What I saw didn't make sense at first. Liam wasn't alone. A woman was standing beside his desk, holding something in her hand. I recognized her immediately, and the realization hit me so hard that I had to grip the doorframe. It was Claire, Robert's coworker. The woman I had met several times at company dinners. The woman Robert had always described as just a friend from the office. I couldn't hear what they were saying anymore. My mind was racing too fast. Then Claire looked toward Liam and whispered something. Liam shook his head. No. She can't find out. Those words changed everything. I stepped backward before either of them could see me. My heart was pounding so loudly that I was certain they could hear it through the door. I hurried downstairs and sat on the sofa, pretending nothing had happened. But now every memory involving Claire and Robert began replaying in my mind. The late meetings. The sudden business trips. The password change on his phone. The way he sometimes smiled at messages and then turned the screen away from me. I had noticed all of it. I just hadn't wanted to believe what it meant. And suddenly Liam's secret wasn't the mystery anymore. The real mystery was why my stepson was involved. When Robert came home that evening, he walked through the front door as casually as he always did. He kissed my cheek, dropped his golf bag near the hallway, and asked what we were having for dinner. I looked at him differently. For the first time, I wasn't looking at my husband. I was looking at a man who might have been lying to me. And I realized something even more frightening. Liam had been trying to protect someone. But who? That night, after Robert fell asleep, I noticed his phone charging on the nightstand. A message appeared. Just 4 words. We need to talk. The sender was Claire. I stared at the screen, and suddenly the pieces began falling into place. But there was one piece I still couldn't explain. Why had Liam been protecting her? And what exactly had my stepson discovered before I did? I knew I couldn't confront Robert yet. Because if I was right, asking questions too soon would only give him time to destroy the evidence. So I made a decision that would change my marriage forever. I was going to find out the truth first. And the next morning, I discovered that the truth was much worse than I had imagined. The next morning, I woke before Robert did. I barely slept at all. The message from Claire kept replaying in my head, but there was something else bothering me even more, Liam's silence. I waited until Robert left for work before going upstairs. Liam was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. The moment he saw me, his expression changed. He knew. Not everything, perhaps, but enough to realize that I had seen something I wasn't supposed to see. Liam, I said quietly, we need to talk. He stared at the table for several seconds. Then he finally said, you saw Claire yesterday. It wasn't a question. My heart sank. So you knew she was there? He nodded. And Dad? Another long silence. Yes, he finally admitted. Those two words felt like a door opening into a room I had been afraid to enter. I sat across from him. How long? Liam rubbed his forehead. I don't know exactly. But it's been going on for months. Months. I had spent months believing my marriage was simply going through a difficult period. I had blamed stress, work, routine, and the distance that had slowly appeared between Robert and me. But while I was searching for explanations, Robert had apparently been building another life behind my back. What do you know? I asked. Liam looked uncomfortable. I found out by accident. Dad left his laptop open one night. I saw messages. At first I thought it was just flirting. Then I realized it was more. I felt my throat tighten. Why didn't you tell me? His eyes finally met mine. Because I was scared. Scared of what? Of destroying the family. That answer hurt more than I expected. Liam explained that Robert had warned him not to interfere. He had apparently told his son that the situation was complicated and that eventually he would handle it. But months passed. And nothing changed. Instead, Robert became better at hiding everything. The late nights continued. The secret phone calls continued. And every time I questioned him, he had another explanation ready. Then Liam told me something I wasn't prepared for. Claire wasn't the only person Dad was talking to. I stared at him. What do you mean? He hesitated before answering. There was another woman. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. One affair was devastating enough. But now I was beginning to understand why Robert had become so protective of his phone and why his stories never quite matched. Liam reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I saved some screenshots. He placed the phone on the table. I didn't want to look. But I knew I had to. The first message was harmless. The second wasn't. Then came another. And another. Different names. Different conversations. Different excuses. My hands began shaking. Robert hadn't simply made one terrible mistake. He had created a pattern. And suddenly, the question wasn't whether he had betrayed me. The question was how many times he had done it. I looked at Liam. Why are you showing me this now? His voice became quieter. Because last night Claire called me. I froze. What did she say? Liam swallowed. She told me Dad is planning to leave. Everything inside me went cold. Leave me? He nodded. But that's not the worst part. I waited. Liam looked toward the hallway as if he were afraid someone might be listening. Claire thinks Dad has been using her too. The room became completely silent. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just an affair. There were lies inside lies. Robert had been telling me one story, Claire another, and Liam had been caught in the middle of all of it. But there was still one thing I didn't understand. If Robert planned to leave me, why had he continued pretending everything was normal? Why keep coming home? Why kiss me goodnight? Why tell me he loved me? Then my phone vibrated. An unknown number had sent me a photograph. I opened it. It was Robert. But he wasn't with Claire. He was standing outside a house I had never seen before, holding hands with another woman. And beneath the photograph was a single sentence. "Ask your husband who really owns this house." My heart stopped. Because I recognized the address. It was the address Robert had told me he was planning to use for a business investment. And suddenly, the betrayal I thought I understood became something far bigger. Someone had been watching Robert. And now, someone was watching me. I stared at the photograph until the screen blurred in front of my eyes. The woman beside Robert wasn't Claire. I had never seen her before, but there was something about the house behind them that made my stomach turn. I had seen that house in one of Robert's emails months earlier. He had called it an investment property, something that would eventually become part of our future. But now I was beginning to wonder whether there had ever been a future he intended to share with me. I looked at Liam. "Who sent this?" He shook his head. "I don't know." "Does Claire know about her?" "I don't think so." That answer frightened me more than anything else. Because if Claire didn't know, then Robert had been hiding another relationship from the woman he was supposedly involved with. And if he could lie to Claire, he could lie to anyone. I asked Liam to send the photograph to me, then deleted the original message from my phone. I didn't know who was watching us, and I didn't know whether the person sending those messages wanted to help me or destroy me. Either way, I knew one thing: I couldn't afford to panic. So I did something I had never imagined doing. I started investigating my own husband. For the next few days, I said nothing. I smiled when Robert came home. I asked about his day. I listened when he complained about work. I even laughed when he made jokes. But underneath that ordinary routine, I was paying attention to everything. Every phone call. Every unexplained expense. Every time he left the room with his phone. And eventually, I noticed something. Robert had started receiving letters from the bank. He always opened them before I could see them, then immediately put them in his briefcase. One evening, after he went upstairs to shower, I opened the briefcase. Inside was a folder containing documents for the property. The house wasn't an investment. It wasn't even registered in Robert's name. It belonged to a company. And the company had been created only 8 months earlier. I felt a chill run through me. Then I saw the name of the person listed as the authorized representative. Claire. I sat there completely still. So Claire wasn't simply Robert's affair partner. She was connected to his financial plans. But why? Before I could read further, I heard footsteps on the stairs. I quickly put everything back exactly as I had found it. Robert entered the room. "Everything okay?" I smiled. "Of course." He looked at me for a moment longer than usual. Then he smiled back. But something had changed. He was watching me now. That night, I barely slept. At around 2 in the morning, I heard Robert's phone vibrate. He quietly got out of bed and walked into the hallway. I waited. Then I heard him whispering. "She doesn't know anything." My entire body went cold. A pause. Then he said, "No. Liam hasn't told her." I closed my eyes. He was talking about me. And Liam. So Robert knew Liam had discovered something. But there was more. "Once the papers are signed, it's over," Robert whispered. Then silence. I waited until he returned to bed. The next morning, I called Liam. "We need to talk," I told him. We met at a small coffee shop away from the house. I showed him the photograph and explained what I had found. He looked stunned. "Mom, I swear I didn't know about the company." "I believe you." He lowered his voice. "Then maybe we should find out who that woman is." We started searching through the information we had. And after nearly an hour, we found a connection. Her name was Natalie. She wasn't a stranger to Robert. She had worked with him years earlier. But that wasn't the shocking part. Natalie was also the former owner of the property. And according to the records Liam found, Robert had transferred a large amount of money to her shortly before creating the company. Suddenly, the photograph made sense. But one question remained. Why would Robert need Claire, Natalie, and a secret company? Then Liam received another message. This time, there was no photograph. Only a sentence. Your father isn't having an affair. He's planning something much worse. I read it twice. Then the phone rang. It was Robert. I answered as calmly as I could. Hello? His voice sounded completely normal. Where are you? I looked across the table at Liam. Just out shopping. There was a pause. Then Robert said something that made my blood run cold. That's strange. Because I just saw you leave the coffee shop. My heart stopped. He knew where we were. And if Robert had been watching us, then someone else had been watching him too. The game had changed. This was no longer about catching a cheating husband. It was about discovering what he was willing to destroy to keep his secret. And I was about to learn that the woman in the photograph wasn't his biggest secret. I was, for the first time since I had married Robert, I understood what it felt like to be afraid of the person sleeping beside me. Not because I thought he would physically hurt me, but because I no longer knew what he was capable of doing to protect his secrets. He had lied to me, manipulated the people around him, and apparently created an entire financial arrangement without my knowledge. Now he knew that Liam and I were asking questions. That meant we were no longer simply investigating him. We were part of the problem he needed to solve. I drove home slowly that evening, replaying his words from the phone call. I just saw you leave the coffee shop. He had sounded calm, almost amused, but there had been something underneath his voice that I couldn't ignore. He wasn't asking where I had been. He already knew. When I walked through the front door, Robert was sitting in the living room. He looked up from his phone and smiled. Good day? I forced myself to smile back. Nothing special. He nodded, but his eyes stayed on me. Then he asked, did you see anyone? The question was casual. Too casual. I shook my head. No. Why? Just wondering. He returned his attention to his phone. But I noticed his hand tighten around it. That night, I made another decision. I wasn't going to confront him until I knew exactly what he was hiding. So I called Claire. She didn't answer the first time. Or the second. On the third attempt, she finally picked up. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Why are you calling me? I swallowed. Because I know about Robert. Silence. Then she said, you don't know everything. Those words were exactly what I had expected. Then tell me. She hesitated. I can't do this over the phone. We agreed to meet the next afternoon. But before we could hang up, Claire said something that stopped me. Bring Liam. I asked why. She replied, because he already knows more than Robert thinks. Then she disconnected. The next afternoon, Liam and I met Claire in a quiet parking lot. She looked exhausted. The confident woman I had seen at company dinners was gone. She kept checking the mirrors as if she expected someone to appear. I never wanted this, she said. I stared at her. Then why did you stay? She looked down. Because Robert promised me something. What? That he was leaving you. My heart sank. Claire explained that Robert had told her our marriage was finished and that he was preparing to separate from me. She believed him because he had shown her documents that appeared to prove he was moving assets. But eventually, she discovered the documents weren't what she thought. Robert wasn't preparing to leave me. He was preparing to protect himself. The property wasn't simply an investment. It was part of a plan to move money away from accounts connected to our marriage. I felt sick. How much? Claire shook her head. I don't know exactly. But it's a lot. Then Liam spoke. What about Natalie? Claire's face changed. You know about Natalie? Liam nodded. Claire looked terrified. Natalie isn't another affair. She paused. She's his former business partner. That explained why the photograph had been misleading. Robert had been meeting Natalie, but there was something far more complicated happening between them. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. I kept copies. Inside were documents, bank transfers, and messages. There was enough information to prove that Robert had been moving money without telling me. But one document stood out. It showed a transfer scheduled for the following morning. A huge amount. And the destination account belonged to the company registered under Claire's name. I looked at her. What happens if this transfer goes through? She answered quietly. Then getting the money back will be almost impossible. Everything suddenly became clear. Robert wasn't waiting for us to discover his secret. He was racing against us. We had less than 24 hours. Liam looked at me. What are we going to do? For several seconds, I couldn't answer. I thought about confronting Robert. I thought about calling the police. I thought about going straight to a lawyer. But then I remembered something. Robert believed I knew nothing. That was our only advantage. So I decided not to expose him. Not yet. Instead, I would let him believe his plan was working. That evening, I returned home and acted completely normal. Robert watched me carefully during dinner. Then, almost casually, he said, "We should talk about our future." My heart pounded. What about it? He reached across the table and took my hand. I think we need a fresh start. I looked into the eyes of the man who had betrayed me and realized something painful. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was trying to make sure I wouldn't stop him. I smiled softly. Maybe you're right. His shoulders relaxed. He thought I had believed him. But he didn't know that Liam had already contacted a lawyer. And he didn't know that the documents Claire gave me were safely hidden somewhere he would never think to look. For the first time, Robert believed he had one. And that was exactly what I wanted him to believe. Because the next morning, while Robert prepared to make the transfer, I was preparing to make a move of my own. A move that would expose everything. But before I could act, my phone rang. It was Liam. His voice was shaking. Mom, you need to come here right now. Why? He was silent for a moment. Then he said, Dad found out. My blood ran cold. Found out what? Everything. And before I could ask another question, the call ended.